Hey there, welcome back. Time for more Tales from the Swamp. Today we're going to be reading a book called The Rear Guard by Tennis Morrill. The castle would hold. No matter the forces, the walls of Cascabel Hall would never fail. But that was small consolation for Menegor. He was hungry. In fact, he had never been so hungry. The well in the atrium of the fortress supplied him with enough water to hold there until the Second Era, but his stomach reminded Menegor, minute to minute, that he needed food. The wagon load of supplies mocked him. When his army, the forces of the King of Solitude, had left Cascabel Hall, and he had manned the battlements as the rear guard to protect their retreat, they had left a wagon behind to supply him with enough food for months. It was not until the night after they left that he inspected the larder and found that nothing edible was in the wagon. Trunk after trunk was filled with netch armor from the army's incursion into Morrowind. Apparently his Nord confederates had assumed that the lightly opaque material was hardtack and aspic. If the Dunmer whose caravan had been raided knew about this, they would never be able to stop laughing. Menegor thought that his fellow mercenary and kinswoman Erin would have found this amusing as well. She had spoken with great authority about netch leather, being an expert of sorts on light armor, but she had made a point to mention that it could not be eaten like other leather in occasions of hardship. It was a pity she couldn't be there to enjoy the irony, Menegor thought savagely. She had returned to Morrowind even before the king's army had left, preferring a life as a wanted fugitive to a free existence in the cold of Skyrim. All the weeds in the courtyard had been devoured by the rearguard's 16th day manning Cascabel Hall. The entire castle had been scoured, rotten tubers in the mulch pile found and consumed, a dusty bouquet in the countess's bedchamber, eaten, almost every rat and insect but the most cunning, infesting the castle walls, had been tracked down and gobbled up. The castellan's chambers, filled with acrid, inedible law books, had yielded a couple crumbs of bread. Menegor had even scraped moss from the stones. There was no denying it. He would be dead from starvation before his army returned to break the ranks of the enemies who surrounded the fortress. The worst part, said Menegor, who had taken to talking himself on only the second day alone in the castle, is how close sustenance is. A vast arbor of golden apples stretched acre after acre near the castle walls. The sunlight cast a seductive gleam on the fruit, and the cruel wind carried sweet smells into Cascabel to torture him. Like most Bosmer, Menegor was an archer. He was a master of long and medium distance fighting, but in close quarters, as he would be if he dared to leave the castle and enter the enemy camp in the arbor, he knew he would not last long. At some point, he knew he would have to try, but he had been dreading the day. It was upon him now. Menegor put on the netched armor for the first time, feeling the powdery, almost velvet texture of the rendered leather against his skin. There was also a barely perceptible throb, which he recognized as the remnant nematosis of the netch's venomous flesh, still tingling months after its death with domesticated poison. The combination made him feel energized. Erin had described this sensation perfectly, just as she had explained how to defend himself while wearing netch leather armor. Under cover of night, Menegor crept out of the back gate of the castle, locking it behind him with a rather cumbersome key. He made for the arbor as quietly as he could, but a passing sentry, coming behind a tree, saw him. Remaining calm, Menegor did as he remembered Erin had instructed, only moving after the attack had been launched. The sentry's blade glided against the armor and knocked to the left, throwing the young man off balance. That was the trick, as he understood it. You had to be prepared to be hit and merely move with the blow, allowing the membranous armor to divert the injury away. Use your enemy's momentum against him, as Erin used to say. There were several more close encounters in the arbor, but each swing of an axe and each thrust of a sword found purchase elsewhere. With handfuls of apples, Menegor ran the gauntlet back to the castle. He locked the back gate door behind him and fell into an orgy of eating. For week after week, the Bosmer stole out to gather his food. The guards began anticipating his raids, but he kept his schedule irregular and always remembered when attacked to wait for the blow, accept it, and then turn. In such a way, he lived and survived his lonely vigil in Cascabel Hall. 4 months later, as he was preparing for another seizure of apples, Menegor heard a loud clamor at the front gate. Surveying the group from a safe distance on the battlements, he saw the shields of the King of Solitude, his ally the Count of Cascabel, and their enemy the King of Faron. Evidently, a truce had been called. Menegor opened the gates, and the combined armies flooded the courtyard. Many of the knights of Faron sought to shake the hand of the man they had named the Shadow of the Arbor, expressing their admiration at his defensive skills, and apologizing good-naturedly for their attempts to slay him. Only doing their job, you know. There's hardly an apple left on the vines, said the King of Solitude. Well, I started on the edges and worked my way in, explained Menegor. I brought back extra fruit to tempt the rats out of the walls, so I could have a little meat as well. We've spent the last several months working out the details of the truce, said the king. Really quite exhausting. At any rate, the Count will be taking back possession of his castle now. There's a small detail we need to work out. You're a mercenary, and as such, responsible for your own expenses. If you had been a subject of mine, things might be different. But there are certain old rules of law that must be respected. Menegor anticipated the strike. The problem is, the king continued, you've taken a good deal of the Count's crops while here. By any reasonable computation, you've eaten an amount equal to and likely exceeding your mercenary's wages. Obviously, I would not want to penalize you for the excellent job you've done, defending the castle in uncomfortable circumstances. But you agree that it's important that we observe the old rules of law, don't you? Of course, replied Menegor, accepting the blow. I'm delighted to hear that, said the king. Our estimation is that you owe the Count of Cascabel 37 imperial gold, which I will gladly pay to myself with interest after the autumn-tide harvest, said Menegor. There's more left on the vine than you suggest. The Kings of Solitude and Faron and the Count of Cascabel stared at the Bosmer. We agreed to abide to the strictest old rules of law, and I've had time to read a great many books over the time you were making your truce. In 3rd Era 246, during the reign of Uriel IV, the Imperial Council, in an attempt to clear up some questions of property rights in Skyrim during those chaotic days, decreed that any man without a liege who occupied a castle for more than 3 months would be granted the rights and titles of that estate. It's a good law, of course, meant to discourage absent and foreign landlords. Menegor smiled, feeling the now familiar sensation of a glancing strike diverting. By the rule of law, I am the Count of Cascabel. The rearguard son still holds the title Count of Cascabel, and he grows the finest, most delectable apples in the Empire. Hee 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 hee. How sneaky. I like that book a lot. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have a very comfy night. Bye!